I never thought the sound of paper could break me, but the moment I tore open the thick envelope lying on my kitchen table, I felt the ground shift beneath me. My hands trembled as I unfolded the document, and the words blurred before my eyes. At the top, bold letters screamed back at me. Plaintiffs: Frank Bennett and Margaret Bennett. Defendant: Laura Bennett. My own parents had filed a lawsuit against me. I blinked hard, forcing myself to keep reading, and then my chest constricted as if someone had driven a knife straight through me. They were demanding that the house I had worked 15 years to buy be transferred to my brother Gary Bennett. The phrase repeated in my head like a cruel echo transferred to my brother. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind me, the ticking clock on the wall, but everything felt muted, drowned beneath the roar of betrayal flooding my ears. My parents. The people who raised me, who should have been proud of me, had dragged me into court as if I were a criminal just because I bought a home with my own hard-earned money. My knees buckled and I dropped into the nearest chair. The edge of the wooden seat bit into my thighs, but I barely registered the pain. The paper shook in my grip, the black ink stark against the whiteness of the page, so sharp it seemed to slice through my very sense of self. All those years of scrubbing dishes in greasy diners until my fingers cracked balancing textbooks on my lap during night shifts, calculating every penny in a worn leather notebook. None of it mattered. None of it counted. In my parents' eyes, because I was a daughter, I did not deserve to own a home. I glanced at the next line in the summons and bile rose in my throat. The justification they had submitted was scrawled in cold legal language, but the meaning was unmistakable. The property in question should rightfully belong to the male heir of the family, Gary Bennett, my brother. My brother, who had never worked a stable job in his life, who slept until noon, who burned through money on cars and liquor, who laughed when I stayed home to study while he partied. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to steady my breathing, but the panic spread like wildfire. The betrayal was not only legal, not only financial, it was blood-deep, cultural, a chain of contempt for daughters stretched from the past into this moment. I remembered my mother's voice years ago, sharp as broken glass. Laura, don't overdo it. You'll get married and a husband will take care of you. Let Gary focus on being the man of the house. I had swallowed that bitterness in silence, believing one day my effort would prove her wrong. But here I was, clutching a summons that declared she had been serious all along. A hollow laugh escaped me, harsh and raw, startling in the empty kitchen. My coffee cup slipped from my grasp and shattered on the floor, dark liquid spreading across the tiles like blood seeping from a wound. The smell of bitter roasted beans filled the air, mixing with the metallic taste of dread on my tongue. I pressed the paper against the table, trying to flatten it. Trying to flatten the reality that my parents had chosen Gary over me yet again, only this time not in words or favoritism, but in a court of law. The betrayal was inked, notarized, and sealed with the crimson stamp of the county court. Tears stung my eyes, hot and unrelenting, blurring the legal jargon into smudges. I thought of my grandmother Evelyn, her frail hands slipping a $20 bill into my coat pocket when I was a teenager, whispering, "Don't let them take your dreams, Laura. One day you'll have your own place." She had believed in me when no one else did, and now that dream, the house I had finally unlocked with my own key, the place that smelled of fresh paint and hope, was being ripped from me by the very people who should have defended me. Rage surged through me, colliding with grief. My father's stern face flashed in my mind, my mother's tight-lipped disapproval, Gary's mocking smirk. I could almost hear his voice sneering, "You a house. That's not for a woman. That's mine." The paper in my hands became more than paper. It was proof that my bloodline did not see me as blood at all, only as an obstacle to their twisted idea of legacy. A chill ran through me, raising goosebumps on my arms. The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in the humming refrigerator louder, the clock ticking faster. My own home suddenly felt like enemy territory. I wanted to scream, to tear the summons apart, but a deeper voice inside whispered, "No, this is the fight of your life. This is where you stand." My heart hammered steady now, not with fear, but with a strange, fierce determination. If they wanted to drag me into court, if they wanted to erase my 15 years of sacrifice because I was born a daughter and not a son, then they would face everything I carried. Every receipt, every scar, every sleepless night I had endured while Gary wasted away his. I would not let them reduce me to nothing. The clock struck the hour, the chime ringing hollow and cold, but inside me something had ignited. Betrayal had cut me open, but from the wound came clarity. My parents had taken me to court, yes, but they had also given me the stage to expose the truth. They thought they could silence me with shame. They would learn soon enough that silence was no longer in my vocabulary. When I was 15, while most girls my age were shopping for prom dresses or gossiping about crushes in the school cafeteria, I was pushing a mop across the tiled floor of the town library. The smell of dust and old paper clung to my clothes as I shelved books until my arms ached, and later at night I would trade the silence of the library for the clang of plates in a greasy diner, my hands raw from hot water and soap. Every dollar I earned, I folded carefully into a worn leather notebook, recording each cent as though my life depended on it, because in many ways it did. My parents, Frank and Margaret, never hid where their loyalties lay. They looked at me, their daughter, and saw someone temporary, someone destined to leave and belong to another family through marriage. They looked at Gary, my brother, and saw legacy. "You are the man of this family," my father used to tell him as he handed over $20 bills for gas clothes or whatever else Gary demanded. My mother would nod and smile proudly, her eyes soft whenever she looked at him. When she turned her gaze on me, it hardened into something sharp, like I was a stubborn stain she couldn't scrub out. The message was constant, relentless. Gary was the future, I was a footnote. The memory of one summer still burns like fire inside me. Gary had crashed his car drunk into a ditch. Instead of grounding him, instead of consequences, my parents pooled their savings to bail him out, patting his shoulder as though he were a victim of cruel luck. Meanwhile, I sat in my room staring at the bill for my upcoming school trip to Washington, D.C., a trip I had dreamed of since middle school. I never asked if I could go. I already knew the answer. "Trips like that aren't for girls like you," my mother had said flatly when she saw the brochure. "Save your money for something practical." Dresses. A hope chest. I had torn the brochure into tiny pieces that night, the paper cutting into my fingers, my tears smudging the print. That was the beginning of my vow. If my parents would not invest in me, I would invest in myself. I studied harder than anyone I knew. While Gary stumbled through classes copying homework, skipping lectures, I built my future brick by brick. I remember sitting on the cold floor of our kitchen, textbooks spread around me like a fortress, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Outside, Gary's friends revved their cars and shouted, preparing for another night of drinking. My father poked his head in once and shook his head. "You'll ruin your eyes reading like that. Why bother? A husband will take care of you." His words stung, but I clenched my pen tighter. They believed I was fragile, disposable. I would prove them wrong. I got my first real taste of independence when I landed a job tutoring math at the community center. The pay was barely enough to cover books, but the respect I felt when a younger student smiled at me and said, "Thanks. I get it now," was worth more than gold. That night, when I came home and proudly told my mother, she pursed her lips and muttered, "Gary could tutor too if he wanted, but he has bigger things ahead." I swallowed the anger burning in my throat. Gary's bigger things consisted of sleeping past noon and throwing tantrums when his allowance ran out. But in my parents' eyes, that was potential, while my hard work was nothing but wasted effort. My grandmother, Evelyn, was the only one who saw me. She lived in a small bungalow at the edge of town, her garden filled with roses she tended with trembling hands. I would stop by after work, collapsing into the wooden chair on her porch, and she would hand me iced tea, her eyes soft with pride. "Don't let them tell you who you are," she whispered once, slipping a crumpled 20 into my palm. "You are stronger than they know." I kept that bill pressed between the pages of my notebook for years, not for its value, but as proof someone believed in me. School events came and went, each one a reminder of what I missed. I never had the glittering dress, the slow dance under fairy lights. Instead, I wore stained aprons and steel-toed shoes, the soundtrack of my youth, the hiss of frying oil and the clatter of dishes. But while Gary floated through life like a spoiled prince, I was building armor. By the time high school ended, Gary's grades barely scraped the bottom of the barrel. He was accepted nowhere. My parents shrugged. "He'll find his way," my father said. "A man always does." When I showed them my acceptance letter to community college with a partial scholarship for accounting, my mother scoffed. "Accounting? Why waste your time? You'll end up changing diapers anyway." Her words cut deep, but I tucked the letter into my drawer, my heart swelling with quiet pride. College was brutal. I worked nights at the diner, mornings at the library, and afternoons in class. I drank more instant coffee than water, my hands shaking from exhaustion, but every exam I passed was another brick laid in my foundation. Meanwhile, Gary drifted from odd job to odd job, quitting whenever it became inconvenient. My parents continued to cover his bills, telling anyone who would listen that he was finding his true calling. I was invisible, except to the professors who praised my precision, to the bank clerk who smiled when I deposited another $100 into my savings account, to myself when I balanced my notebook and saw the slow but steady climb of my numbers. The turning point came when I graduated and landed my first job as a junior accountant. My first paycheck felt like lightning in my hands, proof that my labor had not been for nothing. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment, the smell of takeout noodles filling the air, staring at the check as tears rolled down my face. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one had given it to me. I had earned it. My parents barely acknowledged my achievement. My father muttered, "That's nice," and turned back to the television. Gary, sprawled on the couch, laughed and said, "Guess I don't have to pay rent now, huh?" My mother smirked. "Your brother will need your help until he finds steady work. It's what family does." That was the moment I understood to them my role was not daughter, not individual. I was a resource, a wallet, a placeholder until Gary got his act together, which he never did. Each paycheck I saved brought me closer to freedom. Each ledger entry was a step away from their grip. I lived frugally, refusing to waste a dime. No vacations, no luxuries, only rent, food, and savings. My coworkers teased me for being stingy, but they didn't know the fire driving me. They didn't know I was clawing my way toward a dream, a home of my own, something no one could take away. Or so I thought. When I look back now, I see the pattern so clearly. The favoritism, the disdain, the endless reinforcement of Gary's worth and my supposed inferiority. It was all leading here to that envelope on my kitchen table. But at 15, 16, 20, I only knew that if I wanted to matter, I had to work twice as hard. I had to silence the voices telling me daughters were temporary, disposable. And for years, I believed I had done it. I believed my silence and sacrifice would one day bloom into undeniable proof. I did not know that proof could still be dismissed not by logic or law, but by bloodlines twisted into shackles. My life after college became a blur of ledgers, receipts, and long nights hunched over spreadsheets, while the glow of a cheap desk lamp strained my eyes. I started at the bottom as a junior accountant at a small firm downtown. The office smelled of burnt coffee and stale printer ink, but to me, it was the scent of freedom. I arrived before dawn, clutching my second-hand briefcase, and left long after sunset, the city lights shimmering against the rain-streaked bus windows as I rode home. Every paycheck was modest, but I treated each one as sacred. I deposited my earnings into a savings account and carefully logged every cent in my notebook, the same one I had carried since I was a teenager. The leather cover was worn, the corners frayed, but inside were neat columns of numbers, my proof of progress. While my coworkers splurged on new clothes or nights out, I packed lunches of peanut butter sandwiches and instant noodles. I skipped vacations, skipped restaurants, skipped anything that would slow the slow climb of my savings. My friends teased me, called me a miser, but they didn't understand the fire in my chest. For me, discipline wasn't just about money. It was survival. Each dollar was a shield against the contempt of my parents, against the years they told me daughters didn't matter. Each entry in my ledger whispered, "You are building something they cannot erase." Meanwhile, Gary floated further into ruin. He tried carpentry for a week, landscaping for 2, retail for a month. Each time he quit slamming doors and cursing managers, and each time my parents soothed him. "He's a man. He's meant for bigger things," my father would say, slipping Gary another wad of cash. My mother's voice would follow Laura, help your brother. You're good with money. Pay his phone bill just until he gets back on his feet. The injustice gnawed at me, but I refused to break. Instead, I buried myself deeper in work. I pursued certifications, stayed late to study tax codes, volunteered for projects no one else wanted. My supervisors noticed. Promotions followed slowly, each one a rung on the ladder out of my parents' shadow. I remember the day I paid off my student loans in full. I sat at my kitchen table, the same notebook open before me, and wrote "Balance Zero" in thick, proud ink. I pressed my pen into the paper so hard it tore, but I didn't care. For the first time, I was free. I walked outside into the chilly evening, the scent of rain heavy in the air, and tilted my head back to the sky. The world felt wide and open, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I was untouchable. But even then, Gary lingered like a shadow. My phone buzzed constantly with his demands: rent money, gas money, bail money. I ignored most of them, but sometimes guilt clawed at me, and I sent him $20 or $40, knowing it would vanish into beer or cigarettes. Every time I regretted it. Every time I promised myself it was the last. My parents, though, never wavered. They called Gary their pride, their true Bennett heir. When neighbors asked about me, my mother waved dismissively. Laura's doing fine, but she's just working. Gary will carry on the family. Those words festered inside me like poison. The cruel irony was that Gary carried nothing but excuses, while I carried the weight of our entire family without acknowledgement. Still, I persevered. I upgraded from a cramped apartment to a slightly larger one, though I kept the same battered furniture. I denied myself luxuries, repeating the mantra, "Not yet." One day. Every night I traced the numbers in my ledger like prayers, willing them to grow. I read books on mortgages, studied housing markets, learned interest rates as if they were lullabies. Knowledge became my armor. By my late 20s, the account had grown thick enough to make my chest ache with pride. $120,000. Enough for a down payment. Enough to carve my own place into the world. Enough to finally plant my flag and say, "This is mine." I remember standing outside the bank with the cashier's check in my hand, the cool spring air sharp against my cheeks, and thinking of all the birthdays I had missed, the dresses I never bought, the vacations I never took. All of it had funneled into this moment. Sacrifice had become foundation. I called my grandmother Evelyn that night, her voice trembling with joy. "You did it, Laura," she whispered, as if afraid to break the fragile wonder of it. "They can never take this from you." Her words warmed me, but part of me knew better. My parents had taken so much already. They had stolen my childhood, my self-worth, my right to feel equal. If they could, they would steal this too. The thought chilled me, but I pushed it aside. I told myself the law was on my side, that deeds and mortgages were stronger than favoritism. I wanted to believe the nightmare of favoritism ended at my front door. For a brief season, I allowed myself to dream. I bought a house, a modest 2-story with peeling white paint and a small yard, but to me, it was a castle. I walked through the empty rooms, breathing in the scent of new beginnings. My footsteps echoed against bare walls, and I laughed, the sound foreign in my own mouth. I ran my fingers along the wooden banister, imagining future dinners, holidays, laughter filling the halls. At last, the years of silence and sacrifice had bloomed into something tangible. It was not just a house. It was proof. Proof that daughters could succeed. Proof that my worth was real. But even as I stood in the living room, sunlight streaming through dust-speckled windows, I felt a tremor of unease. My parents' voices whispered in the back of my mind. A house should go to the son. Gary is the heir. You're only a daughter. I shook the thoughts away, clutching the key in my hand until the edges cut into my palm. This house was mine. I had earned it in grease and ink, in sweat and tears. No one, not even my family, could take that from me, or so I thought. The first time I stepped onto the porch of my house, the boards creaked under my weight, and the air smelled of cut grass and faint, fresh paint. It wasn't the grandest place in the county, but to me, it was a cathedral. 2 stories, a white fence in need of repair, a narrow driveway with cracks like veins and windows that caught the morning sun in a way that made the whole place seem alive. My heart pounded as the realtor handed me the keys, The metal was cool against my palm, and for a moment I simply stood there staring at it, trembling. A key. My key. Not borrowed, not handed down, not owed to anyone. Earned. I slid it into the lock, and the click echoed like a gunshot of freedom. The door swung open with a groan, and a flood of light spilled across the floorboards. The smell of new paint clung to the air, sharp and invigorating. I stepped inside and pressed my back against the door, closing my eyes as tears rolled down my cheeks. I ran my fingers along the wall, rough where the paint hadn't dried evenly, but perfect in its imperfection. Every inch of this place bore the weight of my sacrifice. I walked room to room, imagining where a couch might go, where I would set up a small desk, where someday I might hang photographs of people who chose to be my family, not those who had tried to erase me. Upstairs, sunlight streamed through dusty glass, illuminating particles that danced like gold. I opened a window, and the breeze carried in the smell of lilacs from a neighbor's yard. I leaned on the sill, closing my eyes, breathing in the promise of safety. That evening, I called my grandmother Evelyn. Her voice cracked with emotion when I told her, and I heard the rustle of tissues on the other end of the line. "You did it, Laura," she whispered. "You've broken the chain." Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. For once, I believed the storm was over. I walked through the house that night with bare feet on cool wooden floors, imagining futures. Thanksgiving dinners at a sturdy oak table, Christmas lights twinkling across the porch, laughter filling the rooms where silence had reigned for too long. The house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a declaration. I am here. I matter. The next weekend, my parents came to visit. I thought foolishly that they might show pride. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I'd saved every penny, how I had worked nights and mornings, how I had built this from nothing. I hoped they would finally see me. But when I opened the door and let them inside, their eyes swept the rooms not with wonder, but with calculation. My father Frank ran his hand along the banister and grunted. Solid, good bones. This would suit Gary well. The words sliced through me. My mother Margaret nodded. Yes. He needs a place. It's wasted on a woman alone. I blinked, stunned. The air felt heavy pressing down on me. "This is my house," I managed, my voice trembling but firm. "I worked for it. I saved. I paid for every cent." Frank waved his hand dismissively. "We'll discuss the deed later. For now, be reasonable. Gary is the son. This house belongs in his hands." My mother added with a cold smile. "You'll understand. One day you'll be married. You won't need property. A husband provides." Rage surged through me, hot and uncontrollable. "No," I snapped. "This house is mine. It will never be Gary's." Their faces hardened instantly. My father's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing like storm clouds. My mother pursed her lips, shaking her head in disapproval as if I had cursed in church. They left without another word, the sound of the door slamming echoing through the empty halls like a warning shot. I sank to the floor, my breath ragged. Their rejection hurt, but worse was the certainty in their voices. They didn't see me as a daughter. They didn't see me as a human being who had built something. They saw me as an obstacle standing between their golden son and his undeserved inheritance. That night I walked through my house again, but this time the light felt dimmer, the walls closer. The smell of paint was sharper, stinging my nose. My dream had soured, tainted by their greed. I lay awake in an empty bedroom staring at the ceiling, and I knew peace would not come easy. My key, once a symbol of triumph, now felt like a target. Still, I held it tight in my hand until the edges cut into my palm. If they wanted this house, they would have to tear it from me, and I swore to myself I would never let them. The days after my parents' visit turned heavy like storm clouds gathering low over the horizon. At first, it was subtle missed calls, voicemails left in clipped tones. My mother's voice on the answering machine. "Laura, you need to sign over the deed. This house was never meant for you." My father's curt message. "Do the right thing. Gary is the son. Don't be stubborn." I deleted each one, my jaw clenched, but the weight of their words pressed against me even in sleep. Then came the unannounced visits. I would return from work to find my father's truck parked outside or hear the sharp knock of my mother's hand against the front door. Each time they demanded the same thing. Sign the papers, transfer the house. Each time I refused, and each time their faces hardened further, their eyes cold with something less like family and more like enemies. Gary escalated things further. One evening, just as dusk settled over the neighborhood, I heard a pounding on the door so violent it rattled the glass in the frame. I opened it a crack, and there he stood, my brother, taller than me, by half a foot, his face flushed with drink. He leaned against the doorframe, the sour smell of beer rolling off him. "Nice place," he slurred, eyes roaming the hallway behind me. "Too bad it isn't yours." I tightened my grip on the door. "Go home, Gary." His smirk widened ugly and sharp. "You think you're better than me because you worked yourself half to death for some keys and a mortgage? You're nothing but a woman playing at independence. Houses belong to men. Dad said so. Mom said so. Everyone knows it." Rage ignited in my chest, but I held my ground. "Get off my porch," I said. "This house will never be yours." His hand shot out, slamming against the doorframe inches from my face. "We'll see about that," he growled. His eyes glinted with something dark, something that made me step back and slam the door shut. He pounded on it 3 more times before stomping down the steps, his curses echoing through the night. My hands shook as I locked every bolt, my breath shallow. I barely slept that night, every creak of the house making me flinch. The next morning, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, told me she saw Gary pacing outside at 2 a.m., cigarette glowing in the dark. He looked angry, she said softly, worry etched into her wrinkles. "Be careful, Laura." But the harassment didn't stop. Days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper with crude handwriting. "Hand it over or regret it." My stomach turned cold. I looked around, but the street was empty, only the rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a dog. Fear prickled down my spine, but beneath it, fury smoldered hotter. This was my house. I had earned it. No threat, no intimidation would change that. I began documenting everything, every voicemail, every knock, every shadow I thought lingered too long outside my window. My grandmother Evelyn urged me to stay strong, her voice steady over the phone. "I've lived through this kind of poison before, Laura. Your grandfather once forced me to sign away my inheritance to your uncle because I was a woman. I carried that wound my whole life. Don't let them scar you too." Her words tightened my resolve, but the attacks kept coming. One night, as I pulled into my driveway after a long day at work, I noticed tire tracks carved into the lawn, deep ruts tearing through the grass. My heart sank. Someone had driven over my property deliberately. I knew who. My phone buzzed moments later, a text from Gary Niceyard. Shame if something else happened to it. I forwarded it to myself, saving it as evidence. My parents, instead of condemning him, doubled down. They called me over and over, their voices growing colder, harsher. My mother hissed, "Stop embarrassing this family. Do as we say, and this will be over." My father added, "Don't force us into a corner, Laura. You're making this ugly." Ugly! As if I were the one turning family into a battlefield. But the final blow came in the form of a letter taped to my front door. Unlike the crude threats before, this one bore an official seal. I peeled it off with trembling fingers, my breath catching in my throat as I read the words. "Notice of civil complaint. Filed in county court. Plaintiffs Frank Bennett and Margaret Bennett. Relief sought transfer of property title to Gary Bennett." My vision blurred. They had done it. My own parents had dragged me into court to steal the house I had worked half my life for. The weight of the paper nearly crushed me. I stumbled inside, collapsing into a chair, staring at the neat black text. In their complaint, they argued tradition, obligation, legacy. They claimed Gary as the son was entitled to the family property, even though it had never belonged to them, even though I had purchased it with my own blood and sweat. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. They weren't just questioning my ownership, they were questioning my right to exist as equal blood in this family. My phone buzzed again, a message from Gary. "See, you in court, sis." Better get used to packing. I threw the phone onto the table, fury boiling up until tears burned my eyes. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it seeps in like poison, slow and devastating until you're drowning before you realize it. But this wasn't slow anymore. This was war declared in ink and seal. I sat there for a long time. The paper spread before me, my reflection warped in the sheen of the table. My mind flashed with images, my teenage self scrubbing floors, my notebooks filled with neat numbers, my grandmother's trembling hand pressing a $20 bill into mine. All those sacrifices, all that pain, and now my own parents had twisted it into fuel for Gary's laziness. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to be erased. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one they'd never forget. The night I received the court notice, I didn't sleep. The papers lay on my kitchen table, their crisp edges mocking me under the dim glow of a lamp. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Gary's smirk, my parents' cold stares, the betrayal inked into every line of that complaint. Fear clawed at me, but beneath it a stubborn flame refused to die. If they thought I would walk into court alone, they were wrong. My first call was to my grandmother, Evelyn. She answered on the second ring, her voice weary but steady. "I knew it would come to this," she whispered when I told her. "Frank and Margaret never learned that love is not ownership. Listen to me, Laura. You do not fight this battle in silence. You gather witnesses. You gather proof. You make the truth so heavy that no judge can ignore it." Her words, fragile yet fierce, were the anchor I needed. The next day, I confided in Diane, my closest friend since college. We sat in a quiet cafe, the smell of roasted beans thick in the air as I slid the court notice across the table. Her eyes widened, outrage flashing across her face. "They're suing you for your own house," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut. I knotted my throat tight. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then they're not family, and you're not alone. Whatever you need, statements, records, I'll help you. We'll build this case piece by piece." A tear slipped down my cheek, not from fear, but from relief. For once, someone was standing beside me without condition. That evening, I went to see attorney Helen Brooks, recommended by Diane's cousin. Her office was small, but tidy stacks of files lining the shelves, the faint scent of leather and paper filling the air. Helen was in her 50s, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp behind thin glasses. She read the complaint carefully, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. Finally, she set it down and looked at me. "This is outrageous. They're trying to claim cultural bias as legal precedent. That doesn't fly in this state. But they'll push hard, and they'll use every ounce of intimidation they can. We'll need meticulous documentation." I pulled my notebook from my bag, the same one I'd carried since I was 15, filled with years of earnings, savings, every cent recorded. I placed it on her desk, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I've kept track of everything. Every job, every dollar, every payment toward this house. It's all here." Helen's eyes softened slightly as she flipped through the pages. "This is gold," she said. "Not just financially, but symbolically. It shows discipline, sacrifice, intent. We'll pair it with bank records, pay stubs, mortgage documents. If they want a fight, we'll give them a war built on facts." For the first time in days, hope flickered inside me. We outlined a plan, gather every piece of evidence, every witness who had seen my struggle, every record that proved this house was mine alone. When I left her office, the evening air felt lighter, though the battle ahead loomed large. Over the following weeks, my allies gathered like threads, weaving into a shield. Diane collected photos from our college days, images of me working late nights, scribbling in notebooks while others partied. My boss wrote a letter confirming my years of dedication, the promotions earned through relentless effort. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor, offered to testify about Gary's drunken threats and midnight stalking. "I've seen him, Laura," she said, her hands trembling as she poured tea in her kitchen. "The judge deserves to know the kind of man he is." I hugged her tightly, gratitude swelling in my chest. My grandmother Evelyn prepared her own statement, her voice shaking as she recounted decades of being dismissed as just a woman. She held my hands, her skin paper thin, her eyes fierce. "I will tell them what they did to me and why you must not let them do it to you. This fight is bigger than one house. It is the weight of generations. Each ally strengthened me, each document another brick in the wall I was building against my parents' assault. But the attacks did not stop. Gary left voicemails dripping with contempt. "You think your notebook will save you? Judges don't care about women's scribbles. I'm the heir, Laura. Dad said so. Mom said so. Everyone knows it." His words burned, but instead of breaking me, they became fuel. I saved every recording, every message, each one another piece of evidence Helen tucked into our growing file. One night, exhausted from gathering documents, I sat in my living room surrounded by papers and folders. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what victory might look like walking into court, presenting the truth, watching the smug certainty fade from my parents' eyes. The image steadied me. I wasn't the scared girl who tore up brochures in her bedroom anymore. I was a woman armed with proof, with allies, with a voice they could no longer silence. The eve of the first hearing arrived. I stood by the window, the lights of my neighborhood glowing softly outside. My notebook lay open on the table beside me, Evelyn's words still echoing in my ears. "Don't let them scar you." I touched the pages, the ink faint in places from years of use, and whispered to myself, "They won't. Not this time." The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish, the kind of scent that carried decades of arguments and verdicts. My shoes echoed against the marble as I walked through the heavy doors, my heart thudding so hard it seemed everyone could hear it. The morning sun filtered through high windows, casting long bars of light across the tiled floor, as if the building itself were a cage. I clutched my leather notebook to my chest like armor, its worn edges pressing into my palms. Diane was at my side, her jaw tight, while Helen Brooks, my attorney, strode ahead with calm confidence. In that moment, I envied her steady steps, her unshakable presence. My grandmother Evelyn sat in the gallery, already a thin figure in a blue dress, her silver hair tied neatly, her cane leaning against the bench. When she caught my eye, she gave a small nod, her lips pressed in silent encouragement. I drew strength from it. Across the aisle sat my parents and Gary. My father wore his usual suit, but his tie was crooked and his face pinched with something between arrogance and unease. My mother clutched her purse like it was a lifeline, her lips curved in a thin, self-satisfied smile. Gary lounged back in his chair, his posture casual, but his eyes flicked toward me with a sneer that made my stomach twist. He wore a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit, as if he were trying to costume himself as a man of responsibility. The judge entered William Harris tall and stern, his black robe flowing as he took his seat. The bailiff called the court to order, and the murmur of voices died instantly. My parents' attorney, a slick man in a gray suit, rose first. He launched into a speech about tradition, legacy, and family duty. His words dripped with condescension. In our culture, property is meant to remain within the male line. The defendant, while hardworking, must understand her place. It is the son, Gary Bennett, who is entitled to carry the family home forward. Each word stabbed at me, the echo of every childhood's light reborn in that sterile room. My hands clenched around my notebook until my knuckles whitened. Helen stood when it was her turn, her voice measured precise, every syllable like a blade. "Your Honor, this is not a question of tradition. It is a question of law. The property in question was purchased solely by Ms. Laura Bennett with funds she earned herself. The plaintiffs have contributed nothing financially, and their claims rest only on gender bias. This is not legacy. This is theft cloaked in prejudice." She motioned for me to hand her my notebook. My chest tightened as I let it go, but I watched as she laid it before the judge. This ledger documents 15 years of work savings and sacrifice. Every cent accounted for. It is proof not only of ownership, but of intent, discipline, and independence. Judge Harris flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. My parents' lawyer objected, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. The air crackled with tension. Helen then called our first witness, Mrs. Jenkins. The elderly woman shuffled forward, her hands trembling as she took the oath. Her voice shook, but carried weight. She recounted the nights she saw Gary outside my house, pacing drunk, threatening. He shouted that he would take the house, that it was his by right, she said, her eyes flicking nervously toward Gary. I feared for Laura's safety. Gary shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading. Then Diane took the stand. She spoke of our college years, the nights I stayed in studying and working, the jobs I juggled to save money while others wasted theirs. She held up photos of me at a desk covered in papers, exhaustion etched into my face even at 20. She built her life brick by brick, Diane said firmly. No one handed her anything. She earned this house. My throat tightened as I listened. Each word was a mirror reflecting the years I had lived in silence. But the most powerful testimony came from Evelyn. My grandmother rose slowly, leaning on her cane. But when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. She told the court how decades earlier she had been forced to sign away her inheritance because she was a woman. I was told my brother was the rightful heir, she said, her eyes locking on the judges. I carried that injustice my whole life. Now my granddaughter stands here facing the same cruelty. It is not law. It is not justice. It is prejudice, pure and simple. The courtroom went still. Even Judge Harris leaned forward, his gaze intent. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her smile gone. My father's jaw twitched. Helen closed with a stack of documents, bank statements, pay stubs, mortgage contracts, all in my name. The evidence was undeniable. Yet when Gary took the stand, he sneered through his testimony, painting me as selfish, cold, ungrateful. She thinks she's better than us 'cause she saved some money. He spat, but family means everything goes to the son. That's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. His words hung in the air, raw and ugly, exposing the very bias that fueled the case. When Helen cross-examined, she played his voicemails aloud. His drunken voice filled the courtroom. Houses belong to men. Judges don't care about women's scribbles. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Gary's face paled as his own contempt echoed back at him, undeniable. My parents looked away, shame flickering across their faces for the first time. At last the arguments ended, and the judge's gavel struck once. The room hushed. Judge Harris leaned forward, his expression grave. This court is not here to uphold tradition. It is here to uphold the law. The evidence is clear. The defendant, Ms. Laura Bennett, purchased this property with her own earnings. The plaintiffs have no legal claim. Furthermore, the court condemns the prejudice underlying this case. Gender does not determine ownership. Effort does. Sacrifice does. Ms. Bennett has proven both. My breath caught tears burning my eyes. The words felt like sunlight breaking through years of storm clouds. Therefore, the judge continued, this case is dismissed with prejudice. The deed remains with Ms. Laura Bennett, and I caution the plaintiffs any further harassment or intimidation will be met with legal consequences. The gavel struck again, final and absolute. The sound reverberated through my chest like a victory drum. Relief crashed over me in waves. My grandmother smiled through tears, Diane gripped my hand, and Helen gave a small nod of triumph. Across the aisle, Gary cursed under his breath, his fists clenched. My father's face was stone, my mother's pale as parchment. For once, they had no words. As we left the courtroom, the air outside felt different, crisp, sharp, alive. Reporters had gathered word of the case spreading. Microphones and cameras turned toward me, questions flying. How does it feel to win against your own family? I paused, my notebook clutched tight against my chest. It feels like justice, I said simply. And for the first time, I believed it. When the verdict sank in, it didn't feel like triumph at first. It felt like exhaustion. My body ached as if I had carried stones up a mountain, and though I stood at the summit, the wind bit cold. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their voices sharp and eager, microphones thrust forward. Helen shielded me as best she could, but one question cut through the din. Laura, what happens now with your family? I paused, the marble cool beneath my shoes, and answered softly but firmly. My family chose this battle. I chose to protect my life. From here, our paths are separate. That night, my house was quiet. I walked from room to room, fingertips brushing walls that had witnessed my terror, my rage, my hope. The air smelled of lemon polish and new beginnings. I lit a single candle in the living room, its flame steady, and allowed myself to breathe. I had won, but victories come with casualties. Within a week, word spread through our small town. Neighbors whispered about the lawsuit, the bias, the ugliness laid bare. My parents withdrew, their reputations tarnished. The community that once admired them for church donations and charity events now looked at them with suspicion. Frank avoided the grocery store. Margaret stopped attending church socials. Their smiles no longer held power. Gary fared worse. The recordings of his threats had circulated, leaked beyond the courtroom. At his workplace, one of the few jobs he held for more than a month, his manager called him in and terminated his position. "We can't have someone representing the company with that kind of behavior," he reportedly muttered. Gary's fury spilled online, his social media filled with rants about betrayal and injustice, but few responded. His friends distanced themselves. Alone, unemployed, and exposed, his bravado dissolved. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate his fall. But I did feel the weight of justice pressing balance into a scale that had long tipped against me. My grandmother Evelyn came to visit soon after. She shuffled into my living room, her cane tapping softly against the floor, her eyes bright despite her age. She looked around, her lips curving into a smile. "It feels lighter here," she said. I poured her tea and we sat together in silence for a while. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace, its pendant shaped like a locket worn thin from decades. "This was mine when I was a girl," she said. "It should have been passed to me, but they took it and gave it to my brother. Years later, I bought it back from a pawn shop. I kept it all these years waiting for the right time. Now it's yours." My throat closed as tears blurred my vision. I fastened the necklace around my neck, the cool metal warming against my skin. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered. "I'll never let anyone take this from me." She squeezed my hand. "Not just this," she said. "Never let them take your worth." The following weeks, I fortified my life with boundaries. I installed new locks, added security cameras, and filed a restraining order against Gary after he drove past my house one too many times. Helen handled the paperwork with ruthless efficiency. "Protection isn't paranoia," she told me. "It's wisdom." Diane visited often, helping me furnish the house. Together we painted the living room a soft sage green, the scent of fresh paint erasing the sour memories of my parents' visits. We laughed as we struggled to assemble a bookshelf, our voices echoing in the space once filled with silence and fear. Slowly, the house became more than a fortress. It became a home. Letters arrived, too. One from my parents, terse and bitter. "You've humiliated us. Don't expect forgiveness." I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer unopened beyond the first line. Another from Gary scrawled in anger. "You'll regret this. Blood is forever." That one I handed to Helen, who filed it with the restraining order. I no longer carried their poison in my chest. Instead, I filled my life with chosen family. Evelyn came for Sunday dinners. Diane brought laughter and warmth, and even Mrs. Jenkins stopped by with cookies and gossip. The house rang with voices that cared, with footsteps that respected, with hands that gave instead of grabbed. And through it all, I worked. Each paycheck added another brick of stability, another layer of independence. I saved. I planned. I dreamed. Because the house was never just about shelter. It was proof of effort, of sacrifice, of worth. My parents had tried to erase me, to write me out of legacy, but the deed bore my name. The walls echoed my laughter. The keys jingled in my pocket, sharp and certain. I had defended not just property, but identity. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, I stood on my porch, the air cool and sweet. I looked out at the yard where tire ruts once scarred the grass. Now it was smooth, seeded with new growth. A metaphor I couldn't ignore. Wounds heal if tended. And I was tending. The scars of betrayal would remain, yes, but they no longer bled. They reminded me instead of what I had survived. Justice had spoken, boundaries were drawn, and the future stretched ahead, not burdened by chains of family expectation, but opened by choice. For the first time in my life, I was free. Months have passed since the courtroom doors closed behind me. Yet sometimes I still wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I'll hear another fist hammering against my door. But when I sit up, the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock on my wall. Silence, once filled with dread, has become my greatest comfort. My house stands unchanged on the outside, the same red bricks, the same modest porch, the same yard slowly regrown with new grass. But inside, everything is different. I painted the rooms in soft tones, sage cream, pale blue. The walls that once carried echoes of my parents' cruel words now carry the warmth of laughter and conversation. Diane comes over every weekend bringing coffee and bagels. We sit on the porch as the sun rises talking about work, about life, about how sometimes family isn't blood but choice. Evelyn, though frailer now, insists on Sunday dinners. She tells stories of her youth, of the inheritance stolen from her, of the battles she fought in silence. But when she looks around at this house, her eyes shine with quiet pride. "You broke the chain," she tells me. "You stopped the cycle." Those words stay with me more valuable than any verdict or deed. Gary has disappeared from my daily life. The restraining order keeps him away, though now and then I hear rumors, another job lost, another outburst at a bar. My parents live in the same town, but they might as well be strangers. I see them occasionally across the grocery store aisles, their eyes darting away when they catch mine. We do not speak. There are no more letters, no more voicemails. Only silence, and I have learned to embrace it. Sometimes neighbors ask if I regret it standing against my family in court, airing private wounds in public. I always answer the same, regret no. Pain, yes, but the pain was worth the freedom. Because the truth is, there are two kinds of family, the one you are born into and the one you build. Blood may tie us, but choice defines us. I chose dignity, independence, peace. And I chose to surround myself with people who value me not for what I can give them, but for who I am. My career continues, each project another step forward. I save diligently, not out of fear now, but out of habit and pride. This house is not a fortress anymore. It is a sanctuary. The necklace Evelyn gave me rests against my chest most days, a small locket that reminds me of the generations of women told they were less who never had the chance to fight back. I wear it as a promise that I will never again let anyone reduce my worth to tradition, gender, or expectation. One crisp autumn morning, I planted a small garden in the backyard. Kneeling in the soil, hands, dirty sun warming my back, I felt something I hadn't in years, joy. Pure, untainted joy. Each sprout, each bloom is a testament that life grows even in ground once scarred. My scars remain, but they no longer define me. They remind me that I am capable of surviving betrayal and still creating beauty. To those of you watching, especially those in your 50s and beyond, I know my story might echo pieces of your own. Maybe you've given decades to children who turned ungrateful, or siblings who took advantage, or parents who never saw your worth. Maybe you've been told that tradition outweighs your sacrifice, that your blood obligates you to tolerate cruelty. Let me tell you what I've learned. You are not obligated to keep doors open for people who bring only harm. Love without respect is not love. Family without fairness is not family. Dignity is not something anyone can grant you. It is something you must claim and protect, even if it means standing alone. And if you are listening and feel the weight of betrayal pressing against your chest, know this: you are not powerless. Gather your evidence, find your allies, seek justice, build boundaries, and most of all, do not let anyone convince you that your worth is less because of who you are. If my story has resonated with you, if you have faced your own battles of betrayal and justice, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from, whether it's a small town kitchen like mine, or a big city apartment, or a quiet countryside porch. Your voice matters. And if you found strength in my journey, please take a moment to like this video. It may seem small, but every click is a reminder that stories of resilience can reach others who feel alone right now. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories like mine, true accounts of betrayal, survival, and justice. I promise you will find not only drama, but solidarity, not only pain, but the healing that comes after. To those of you over 50 who have lived enough years to know that life is rarely simple, I ask this stand with me in proving that even after betrayal, even after loss, there is still power in rebuilding. Because no matter your age, it is never too late to draw a line, reclaim your voice, and protect your dignity. Tonight, as I sit at my kitchen table, the candle flickering gently beside me, I write these words with steady hands. I am no longer the frightened girl waiting for the next blow. I am a woman who fought in court, who faced down her family, who defended her worth, and who won. And if I can do it, so can you.